Welcome, everybody. We're back with one more cooking show from Missoula County Extension, and today we're going to talk about pizza. I'm Kelly Moore. I'm the Family and Consumer Science Agent here in Missoula County. So when you think about pizza, everybody has kind of a different opinion what their favorite one is. Oftentimes we think of a pizza having something with red sauce, some kind of mushrooms, possibly peppers, maybe some meat. And I never really liked pizza because of all those reasons I just gave. So it took a trip to San Francisco, probably about 15 years ago. And my brother that I was visiting said, let's have pizza, which I said, it's not my favorite, but he said, just wait till you taste it. And it actually did turn my whole world around about pizza. It was a caramelized onion pizza. No red sauce, no cheese, a great crust with caramelized onions. The best thing I'd ever tasted. So I thought, okay, maybe I like pizza. So ever since then, I'm always on the lookout for a recipe that's a little unusual. So I hope today, with the two recipes I've chosen, you will like them as well and try to make them yourself or create your own. That's the fun thing about pizza, for sure. It's a good chance to get a lot of great local products together. So summertime's a great time to make pizza. I've made pizza on a grill before, and it's a really great flavor. So we want to start out by looking at some of the ways to bake the pizza. I have three different pieces of equipment here. A pizza stone, although this stone I use for a lot of things. I use for baking. You can tell I use a lot because it's pretty dark around here. So it's well used for sure. Stone keeps the heat in for very well for a long time. It gets very hot. And that's what you want your pizza crust to get really crispy. And not because it doesn't bake for that long. So I've used this stone already today on one pizza, and I will show you the results of that soon. This is kind of more traditional pizza size container. It has holes in the bottom so that it allows the air to circulate, keeps the crust from getting soggy. You tend to kind of judge pizzas on maybe some that you've had at local pizza places. Their ovens usually cook a lot at a higher temperature than ours do. So anything that's 500 degrees and above, that's what you bake a pizza at. If you happen to have a brick oven of some kind, you're lucky enough to have that, that is definitely the best way to make a pizza. This is kind of an antique, I guess. This is called a pizza peel. And someone told me this came from like a Pizza Hut from like back in the 60s or something. It's made of wood. It's like teak. It's treated. You don't actually bake the pizza on this because it would probably not be the best for this piece of wood. But a peel is to, and maybe you've seen pictures of people doing this, you can go YouTube it and it's interesting to watch. But when your pizza is, you need to help it into the oven because it's so hot, especially if it's a stone or brick oven. And then you have to keep turning the pizza around to make sure it gets even baking. So you kind of use this to kind of just scoop it up and then just turn. There's a lot of metal pizza peels as well, so either one of those work well. And then once you get the pizza scooped up, it's okay to serve it on here. It looks kind of good that way. So anyway, those are the three pizza baking equipment I have for today. Also, let's talk a little bit about the dough. Obviously, that's a very important part of having a good pizza. There are lots of recipes. Today, I chose two different pizza doughs. One is made with the Cuisinart. And if you've watched me the last few months, you know this is one of my favorite pieces of equipment. There was a little recipe book that came with this Cuisinart, and it's called Basic Pizza Dough. So it can't get much easier than that. And we're going to show you a few kind of simple little things to make sure that your crust tastes the best that it can be. And also, because again, I want to always focus on local products and trying to promote those, the other crust And because you might not have time to always make your own pizza dough. This is La Petite dough. I know dough is made in other businesses as well. So it's just good to try them and see what you think. I've tried this one many times. I like it very well. So I have that in a bowl, and in a few minutes we're going to actually put a pizza together. We'll make 2 pizzas today. One I have a sample of already. One is called a red grape pizza with honey, rosemary, and Parmesan or Pecorino cheese. And the other one is fig, prosciutto, Gorgonzola, and Arugula. And that sounds like a lot of ingredients, but we're going to kind of stack them up. Part of that pizza is going to be kind of a little cold, so a little salty, a little sweet. So it's got great contrast there. And when I was talking about doing a pizza class and thought the fig and prosciutto pizza sounded wonderful, I forgot that maybe in April there would not be fresh figs, which there are not. So the nice thing about a pizza, you can substitute other ingredients. So we're going to use a fig jam today. So that will be coming up pretty soon here. So let's start off with a very basic part of any pizza, that's the dough. So it makes a difference too, what kind of ingredients you use. I mean, it calls for flour. Some people like to use a little whole wheat flour, a combination, but our recipe is just going to use a regular white flour. I found this to be kind of the best flour, the King Arthur bread flour. And this recipe does call for you to use bread flour because it just has a little bit higher rising ability than the regular white flour. And if you ever go on the King Arthur website, amazing recipes on there. You'll love it. You can spend a whole day looking at all the stuff they have on there. So we're going to use that today. We're going to use yeast, another very important part of dough, a pizza dough. This is what causes the pizza crust to rise. Not all recipes call for yeast, but this one does. And it's rapid rise because rapid obviously means it's going to be faster. So that's where we're going to use that. Pizza dough is very basic: salt, the yeast, flour, a little bit of sugar or honey. Sometimes people put honey in there, and a little salt, and that's basically it. So the Cuisinart does a nice job of working through really fast. Something else I wanted to talk about for a couple of minutes is how you measure your flour. That's something we just do automatically. How many people, if I could see you raise your hand, which I can't, but how many people measure their flour by sticking this in here and saying, let's see, okay, that looks like about a cup. But let's see if it really is a cup. Really the best way if you're baking is to take your spoon in and, let's see, so try not to make a big mess here. Just to spoon it into the cup, because when you just stick your cup into the flour bag, it causes the flour to get packed pretty tightly. So you're actually putting more flour in there than what it calls for. So by just doing it this way, you're kind of loosely putting the flour in there. All right, so if this recipe calls for 3 1/3 cups, I believe. So we'll do that. And then, of course, I always get the knife to kind of level it out a little bit. Just put it in here so you can kind of see. So if I'm doing it like that, it still has a little bit of space here. It means I've got to put a little bit more flour in there. If you're doing something like a lot of cakes, if you don't get it just exact, then you're going to have a much tougher product for sure. So there we go. Level it off, and then we're going to dump it in there. So there's one. Put the other one in. This particular recipe only makes enough dough for one crust, I believe, or maybe that's the other one. Maybe this is 2. A lot of times I like to make like personal pizzas, so I'll just make a lot of crust and then have people put their own toppings on. So that's a fun thing, especially with kids. I like kids to make their own pizza. Okay. Let's see, whoops. And of course, if you're working with flour, you're going to make a mess. That's just the way it is. Okay, there's another one. All right. This one. Yeah, I was close to the King Arthur headquarters a few years ago. I would have loved to have taken a tour, but it didn't work out. So next time I will do that. Or if you are into like sourdough, there's a lot of great sourdough recipes. I highly recommend going to that source. Okay. Wow, and we are probably just going to have just enough flour, so that's pretty lucky. All right. So when you're doing a yeast dough also, there's a special way to kind of work with the yeast. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. The yeast is a living organism, so living organisms kind of react differently to hot and cold. So with the yeast, you want it to be pretty warm water to get it to grow. If it's too hot, then you'll kill the yeast. So that's not good either. Okay, 3, and then we got 1/3, almost there. Whoops, well, we won't use that spoon anymore. There we go. I don't think I've ever managed to stay clean and neat and tidy in the kitchen. It's always kind of a mess when I get done, but that's all right. All right, now, so there's our 1/3 cup. Okay. And lucky thing, because we're almost out of flour there. All right, so we'll see what else we have to add to that. We have the yeast. Let's get that started. We want to use our liquid measuring cup, and I think it calls for about a 1 1/3 cup of water. Okay. So there we go. And we're going to heat that. Yeast grows the best when the water is like 120 to 130 degrees. So it's always good if you have a thermometer to kind of test it. Again, if the water's too hot, you will kill the yeast. And if it's too cold, it's not going to grow. So I'm going to show you what it looks like when the yeast will grow. So I'm going to put the timer on about 1 minute, and that seems to work the best. So now we've got our flour in here. We're going to wait for our yeast to mix that up, and then we will pour it into this bowl right here. So we still need to add our salt, and that is about, let's see, 1 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So I just use a regular kosher salt. You can use, Himalayan salt too, that's fine. The salt, certainly there's some salts that are saltier tasting than others, so I encourage you to kind of test it out first, because if the saltier salt, you're not going to want to use as much. Okay. All righty. And so the sugar in this recipe goes with the yeast, because that's what makes the yeast grow. So we're going to take about, let's see, a teaspoon of sugar. I do believe someone told me they've used honey before to add to the yeast, and that works as well. Again, it has to do with the temperature of the honey. You want to make sure that it's blended well. So probably agave would work as well as the sweetener. Okay. Oh. Well, while that's cooking, let's see, put that over here. The second recipe we're going to do, because you always think, well, pizza must have cheese on it, right? The recipe that we're talking about with the grapes, that does have a little Parmesan cheese, and the second one has some Gorgonzola, which isn't a typical pizza cheese for sure. Again, I always recommend that you use a block of cheese instead of the already grated Parmesan. It's just higher quality. And, these last forever. You get a whole lot more value out of getting a large piece than buying the already mixed. Sometimes they put some kind of stabilizers in the grated cheese, so it doesn't always have the same product consistency. Okay, so we've got our water here. We're going to mix our sugar and our yeast together. Right. And if we were using like just a regular yeast, not a rapid rise, you should still proof it. This is what it's called, proofing the yeast. to make sure that it is good yeast, right? Or if you buy yeast in bulk as well. And it's a good thing to always check with the yeast, check the expiration date. So I can see here this says 2022, so I know it's good. If it is outdated, then you're taking a risk that it's not going to work as well. So this will take some time. You don't want to ruin a product because your yeast is no good. Okay? So you can tell already, we've dumped that in. The yeast is starting to foam a little bit on the top, and you can let that go for 10 minutes if you want. It's called blooming the yeast. So that's how you can tell the yeast is good. So it's going to grow in your dough. Okay, so we'll let that sit for just a couple more seconds there. We're also going to use some olive oil. You could use vegetable oil as well, but olive oil just has a much better flavor, and after all, it just kind of goes better with pizza, doesn't it? So, all right. So I'm going to put the lid on here, and I'm just going to use the pulse button here. Just kind of make sure that the flour and the salt is all mixed together. Okay. Because once we pour the wet ingredients in, then we're just going to let it go for a while. Okay. You could certainly do this by hand, but it takes a lot more kneading, so we're going to let the machine do the work instead. All right? Okay. And I think we need the tablespoon for the oil. Let's see. There, put it. We'll just use what we've got over here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start running this in because I know it's good yeast. So I just start pouring it through the tube here, just all the way down, just slowly. And then you can see how the dough starts clinging together. Okay. There we go. So yeah, I don't want to just dump it all in there at one time, kind of give the machine a little bit of room to work there. Okay. Now, I've done that for a couple seconds. Then we're just going to put a tablespoon of olive oil in here. Or just a little bit more. This dough sometimes tends to be a little bit dry because I think we have such a dry climate. So sometimes the recipes need to be adjusted a little bit according to where you live. Okay, now we're going to do on and let it run for about a minute. So now you can see once the dough starts clinging together and kind of cleans the side of the bowl, doesn't stick, then you know we're getting pretty close. So it's doing all the work for you. All right. Okay, so we're going to say that's pretty close to a minute. We're going to take it out here and be very careful. Once you feel it, if it feels a little too sticky, if you start to see dough pieces on your hand, then you need to put the lid back on, add a little bit of flour, like a tablespoon at a time. But actually this dough feels really, really good. So we're just going to clean it out of the bowl here. Make sure you take the blade out. I forgot to do that once, and you really don't want to have blood on your pizza. That's what happened. So I had to throw that one away. All right. And it feels so nice and warm. There's nothing like fresh dough like that. So I'm just going to take it. I'll get this out of the way so you can see. Just kind of roll it a little bit, and then I'm going to cover it and give it a few minutes to rest. Dough likes to just have a little bit of rest time before you start smashing it down. So I'll just usually I have a towel, we'll just use a little paper towel here, cover it up some. Okay. So I'll show you the first pizza I did, because I did want to have one product already done ahead of time. This is the Grape and Rosemary pizza. I'll put it back in the stone. It was made some time ago, so the pizza might be the crust might be a little bit stiffer than I would like for it to be. It's a nice thing about pizza. You can just kind of make up all your own combinations. So what we've done is cut some red grapes in half. First of all, though, the dough, once I just smash it out with my hands too. You don't have to use a rolling pin, just smash it. You don't have to toss it up in the air. Most of us can't do that. So I make it look kind of rustic. That's what I call it. So I just put a little bit of, brush some honey on there. You can heat up a little bit of honey, use a pastry brush, brush across it. Then we took a little bit of oil, olive oil. I took some fresh rosemary, which smells so good. I just cut that up and put it in a little bit of oil, let it sit for a couple hours. Took the pastry brush and brushed all across the dough so it starts to sink in a little bit. And then I cut the grapes in half, just kind of tossed them randomly over there, and drizzled a little bit of honey on the top, like this, and tossed a little bit more rosemary, just fresh. You could use dry, but I think the fresh has so much a better flavor, and it's a beautiful color on there as well. Then I just used a little bit of Parmesan and just grated it right on the top, just like that. And this one's already been cooked, but it's kind of good to add a little bit of fresh on the top while it's cooled off. So, and I used the stone for that one. So, there you go. We'll taste that here soon. And you can also make probably about 4 or 5 smaller pizzas that way if you just roll the dough out in individual pieces. Let's clear some of this away and we'll start making our next pizza. And for the next one, I did want to use the dough that is the La Petite dough. And it's a very nice, easy to work with dough. We'll put this one in for another pizza at another time. There we go. You can also just refrigerate your dough if you didn't want to make the pizza for that day. It will keep usually for a day anyway. Okay. So we're going to put a little bit of flour on our board here. Okay. This is the pan we're going to use for this one. This is the arugula salad on the top. We're going to put some gorgonzola, a little bit of red onion. So I'm going to get that started. So that'll be ready to go. Pizza is a great thing to get your whole family involved or friends because everybody could have a job to do. Right. So I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of flour there on our board. Move this prosciutto out of the way here. Okay. All right. So you can just kind of roll up. You can see all like the air bubbles in there. So then that's a good thing because that's going to make the dough rise very nicely. All right. Sometimes people will put cornmeal in the bottom. That kind of keeps your crust a little crisper as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just kind of start smashing it out and just kind of stretching it. Because the gluten in the dough, that's what makes it stretchable. And of course, for those of you who might be gluten intolerant, then there are special recipes that you can make with a good flour blend that is gluten-free. I found this dough sometimes has such elasticity that it just wants to sometimes stretch right back on you again. So you really have to put some muscle in there to get it spread out. It doesn't mean you have to spread all the way to the edge because that's a pretty big pan. And then sometimes we need just a little bit more flour on top of that. Okay. Yeah, just so it won't stick. If you are lucky enough to make this when figs are fresh, there's so many different varieties. We could do a whole class on figs, but the black mission figs look very nice on there. So I would just say, slice them up and down, and you don't actually cook them for very long on there because that does kind of, they're not a very nice color when you get through. You want it to be fresh. Okay. stretch a little bit more. This one, we're not going to put the prosciutto on there until the crust is already done. Okay, get our onions going here. And like I said, we don't have fresh figs, but we are using a fig jam. So this isn't always easy to find either. It's kind of a specialty thing. So, there are great recipes to make fig jam, so I encourage you to try that as well and use your own. That's very satisfying when you make a pizza and you can say everything on there you grew yourself or you made yourself. Okay. Okay. Yeah, this one, I want to make sure the crust isn't so thick on the sides that, there. Okay. Now I'm going to brush this with just a little bit of olive oil as well. Okay, I'll just put this in this cup here, we'll use that. Okay. All right. Just spread it all the way over, not too heavy. You can also make kind of a little bit of a lip on the side so anything won't spill over. There we go. And as soon as these onions are done, we will kind of scatter those over as well. Okay. The next step, what we're going to do here is to take a little bit of the fig jam. So I'm just going to use a spoon and just start spreading it all around on the pizza. And of course, figs have very tiny little seeds, so don't be surprised when you see those. And there are also some pieces of fig in here, which is good. Don't want to spread it too thick. Let's see, might need a little bit more. If you did want to have a little different flavor, there's like a bacon jam you can make yourself or tomato jam. Any of those would be really tasty on the pizza. Okay, I'm going to try to cover up the whole surface there. All right. So always when you're making it, you think, wow, it doesn't look like the store pizzas you go to, but like I say, I prefer a more rustic looking crust than one that looks like it came out of a machine. And just a little purple onion. You can use any kind of onion. You don't want them to be too overdone. Okay. This recipe calls for a Gorgonzola, which isn't a typical pizza cheese. This is kind of a little bit softer variety, which is very spreadable. So we're going to try to crumble it. We'll see how that goes. And this is kind of either people love these blue cheeses or they just don't like them at all. I can't imagine not liking them, but they're kind of part of the family of stinky cheeses, they're called, which I think that's kind of not a very nice thing to think about, your cheese. It's stinky. There we go. Okay. All righty. Let's see, those are good. We want that to cool off a little bit so we don't just throw it right on our jam there. Okay. Also, this pizza, kind of part of it, like I said before, is going to be cold that you add on to it. We're going to cook the crust first and put the little cheese on there. The salad is going to go in at the very last. And the prosciutto is going to be added before the salad. We're not going to cook that on there, okay? And we're going to put that into a 400-degree oven. Kind of just scatter them throughout here. There we go. That's the one thing about pizza. You want to have a lot of contrast of flavors. Okay. All right, so we're going to stick this in like this to start baking. We'll add our cheese in a couple of minutes. So that's 400 degrees, which is pretty hot, so we'll keep an eye on that. All right. let's move this out of the way here. Okay. All right, now we'll start in with our salad. So we're kind of making like a vinaigrette like we've done before in a couple of other classes. Arugula has a nice peppery flavor to it. It usually holds up well to a vinaigrette as well. It doesn't get soggy like a lot of other leaves. This arugula, I think, is grown locally. Of course, in the wintertime, you have to have a greenhouse, but it really is a very nice flavor. I really like arugula. I don't think we utilize it enough, for sure. So obviously, this is a lot of arugula. We're going to not need quite that much. So let's get another bowl here and kind of separate it out. Let's see. Always when I go to the cabinet, sorry, I get mixed up. Let's just do it in this dish right here so you can see, okay? A lot of times I'll put the actual dressing in the bottom of the dish because if you pour it over the top and toss it around, sometimes that part gets soggy. So you can kind of distribute it a little bit better if it's on the bottom. So basically, I'm going to just use a little bit of oil, a little olive oil. Just kind of guessing. We're going to use fresh lemon juice. So I'll just squeeze that in. Right. And use a whole lemon. And lemons, some of them are juicier than other lemons, so I always try to. Usually the ones that don't look as much like a lemon are the ones that have a lot more juice in them for some reason. The round ones. I'm going to try to fish out the seeds here. Nobody likes to get a lemon seed in their vinaigrette, do they? I'm going to just add a touch of salt. Okay. And let's see where our salt went to. There we go. And I would always say usually you should measure, but sometimes you just have to wing it a little bit too. So there's just a little touch of salt there. And we're going to add just a teeny bit of honey. All right. Just stir that up. Gets a little bit thicker. All right. And a lot of times, those of us who are cooking will stick our finger in there to taste it, but that's probably not the best food safety thing. We're not going to show that today. I'll try to use my manners here. So I'm just going to wash my spoon off a little bit, and then I'll have a taste. Because now's the time. If I need to add something, it's a good time to do it. You won't believe that, but that's perfect. So I'm going to pour a little bit there. Just made a little. Because you can always add more. Whoops, there's a seed we forgot. It's another good reason to put it in the bottom, because then you can see the seeds. All right, so I'm just going to add a little bit at a time. Just kind of toss it around, just roll it around. Whoops. Say I never did not have a messy kitchen. And then also some fresh ground pepper, if you want to do that. All right, so that's going to be ready to go. We'll put that aside. Alrighty. Now let's get to our other ingredients here. Our gorgonzola, excuse me. Since it's going to be, if we just kind of break it off, it's going to be mush in our hands. So we're going to try to cut a little bit of it. Right. You can get gorgonzola already crumbled, but again, it just depends on what flavor. It tends to be a little bit drier. So we're going to make it a little bit bigger chunk so then it'll melt nicely in a few minutes when we put in our crust. Okay. If you absolutely do not like gorgonzola, you can also use, you could use Parmesan. You could use just something that's a little milder flavor. And also, I wanted to tell you a little bit about this right here. This isn't always easy to find, the prosciutto. This actually, if you've done any reading about where prosciutto comes from, it's aged ham and comes from a region in Italy, and so one of the places, but it's really highly prized. There's really something interesting when you learn about this. So it's kind of, it's all, you know, kind of a pork product, but very thin. It's aged and has a really great flavor. So we're just going to kind of pull it apart a little bit and spread that across our crust. It tends to be very pricey if you get the good stuff, but that's okay. It's worth it. You don't have every day. And it doesn't take much. It's rather salty, so it doesn't take a whole lot to make flavor. There we go. And I read too, prosciutto, I mean, you think, wow, that's kind of the fat of the product, but if you ever take that off, they say that is not the real kind of prosciutto. You really need to have this ratio of fat to meat there. Okay. All right, so we've got that going. Again, we're going to get our sweet, savory, salty, all those together. We're going to check our crust here and kind of turn it around a little bit. We won't necessarily use our peel because it's too big, but we'll just kind of, whoops, turn it off here. I make sure it's getting cooked evenly. And the crust is getting puffy on the outside, so that's a good sign. Okay. Probably about 20 minutes, 25 minutes tops is what you want to leave it in there for. I'm going to rinse off this doughy stuff on my hands real quick. Okay. So again, while we're waiting for that to happen, let's go over and just kind of cut a piece of our other pizza that we made earlier. Some people like to eat them hot out of the oven, and other people like for them to sit a little bit and kind of blend the flavors. Again, this is a little bit thicker crust, so it looks almost like more like a pie crust. But that way nothing falls off for sure. So it's kind of a good little appetizer kind of pizza that would stand up to some heavier ingredients to put on the top. Some people just prefer thin crust, so that's also another great option. So, okay, so we'll have to see if we can try that. Right. Some of this paper out of the way here. Our ingredients. I believe this pizza dough from the La Petite pizza dough you can freeze as well. So if you ever find it on sale, it's kind of good to get ahead and keep it in your freezer for a while. Now we can see the other dough that we made is still good. It's still nice and warm. So it'll be a good pizza dough to use for later on. If I was going to freeze this, I would make sure it kind of cools off a little bit too. Then when you want to take it out, let it out so it can rise a little bit. Okay. Well, I would always ask if it was time for any questions, so hopefully one of these days soon, next year, or not next year, but next season, when I'm back on, we will get to meet in person, so I really look forward to that. Yeah, they will all be around here making pizza together and getting to eat it, so that'll be perfect. Right. One thing I did forget to tell you, you can leave the rosemary and the oil for as long as you refrigerate it, so don't ever just leave it out. No, because then that can actually get some bacteria on there enough to make you sick. So any kind of herb you want to put in oil, you do want to keep it refrigerated, and that will only last for so long. If you use a dried product, then it's a little different that way. It's already been treated. So basil, a lot of different herbs go well mixed in olive oil, and it adds that extra flavor if you leave it in there. Okay, let's try one more time to check our dough here. When you're waiting for it to get done, it seems to take forever, doesn't it? You see it the dough's starting to get, looks a little flaky around the side. It's rising a lot more, so probably shouldn't be too much longer. All right, we'll take this over here, clean up just a bit. So I'm sure everybody has lots of pizza dough recipes and ideas. So make sure you contact me at the extension office if you have something you want to share. Right? And I'm happy to try it out. I've gotten lots of great ideas from people, so I'm always open to that. It's kind of the first time we've gotten to use the oven, so it's kind of fun to see how it's working. We're getting some browning on there, so that's good. We might even crank it up to like 425, 450. Like you say, when you the pizza ovens usually cook at like 500. So not having cooked in this oven before, it probably needs to be up a little bit more. Every oven's different, so you'll just have to kind of gauge your own. And let's see this, actually, see if it goes up to 500. No, 480, so now we know. Okay, that's going to be hot enough. I don't think it'll take too much longer at that, for sure. And that's if you are doing a pizza on the grill. I kind of recommend doing a smaller pizza size because, unless your grill, you have to regulate it so much, it cooks so fast. And, you don't want to get that burned crust flavor for sure. So the thin pizzas don't work quite as well on a grill as a little bit thicker one. Okay, at this point, I think I'm going to start spreading a little bit of the Gorgonzola on there so it can kind of get a little melty. So let's pull this out a little bit. Oh, looks good up there. The jam's starting to kind of bubble a little bit. So we'll just sprinkle that around. Now, some of you are probably saying, wow, that is way too much cheese, but I always say, cannot have too much cheese. Make sure every spot is covered. Alrighty, let's throw that back in. Let that cook for a couple of minutes. Always when I buy a container of arugula, sometimes I will have a lot left over after I do this, and it's always nice to do the same kind of vinaigrette with arugula. I even put it on scrambled eggs or anything because I think it just adds a really nice freshness to it. So it doesn't last too long once you open it, so you want to make sure you eat it up in a hurry. And our next step will be to put the prosciutto on there. Again, we don't want to cook it because that'll ruin it. We just want to heat it up just a little bit. Up now the cheese is getting oozy, so it's a good time to put that on there. I'm just going to kind of pull it apart a little bit. I throw some pieces on there. Right. Again, we're not going to put too many on there, not overdo it, but just enough to, every piece gets a little flavor of everything. Yeah, that should do it. Okay, now quick couple of minutes in there, and then I think we'll be ready to put the salad on top. So, get that out of the way. And we're going to take a final turn here. Make sure that the crust looks evenly cooked. And these a little bit thicker crusted pizza, it's nice to use this kind of pan because then the heat comes up through and cooks it all on the bottom evenly. Because nobody wants a soggy crust. These boards are, if you ever do find one of these are great to use for charcuterie boards or crudités, anything. It looks really nice on a table. So, yeah. Or they do still make those. You can order those as well. So they're very multi-purpose. Plus you can hang them up on the wall too. That looks good. And the stone, I usually bake cookies because they have a nice crusty bottom to them. So I always suggest everybody always have a stone. They come in really handy. Sure. Occasionally they do crack and break, but that just means you've used them a lot. Okay. Alrighty. We're going to say this guy is done here. And be careful because that's going to be very, very hot. I know. Right. So I will bring it down. So there, everything's kind of melted on the top and looks great. Now we're going to cover up with a little bit of salad. And we'll turn that off later. Since I haven't used that oven before, I'll have to spend a little more time getting to know it. Okay, so now we're just ready to put this on, even if it's a hot pizza. And again, a little fresh ground pepper would go well on the top of that. You could also grate a little bit of Parmesan on there. So just whatever you wanted to top it off. Gonna get all of that on there. And it tastes best if you eat it like right now, okay? So there are our 2 pizzas for today. Something a little unusual, and I hope you will try them at home, and I hope you will like them. Thanks for joining us again, and I'll see you next time.